My name's Ruth Knight and I work at the Centre for Philanthropy and Non-Profit Studies at QT. The centre has been going for 19 years, with 20 years next year, and we work with anyone in the sector. We offer courses and we do research, and we really look at the issues concerning the non-profit sector and how we are leading and evaluating and changing things, community issues. And Tea Buns started nearly 2 years ago now, actually. And it was just a chance for everybody in the sector to be able to come and have a cup of tea together. That was the concept. And of course, back then we weren't all online because of COVID, but it was really because we knew that everybody's spread out across the country and we wanted to invite everybody that could come along. And so we now do this every last Thursday of the month. And you and your colleagues and anyone in the sector is most welcome to join us. We look at a different topic every month, and the format that seems to be working is that we have a guest speaker, someone that we can ask questions of, someone that's been doing some research in the area, something like that. And then we just have a conversation about the topic. And as I said, every month it's something different, but I base it on either requests from you as a community saying, look, can we talk about this? Or I might sort of see some research that's coming up. But of course, this year it's been very COVID related. We started off back in February looking at resiliency and vulnerability, and pretty much every month it's been an angle of how we're coping during COVID. And today is no different. We are going to look at behaviour change during COVID, but also we're not just going to look at what's been happening. We're going to talk with Ross Gordon from QUT, who's been doing some research and understands maybe some of the leadership strategies that we can take as we go forward, hopefully out of COVID, and have a look at maybe some of the strategies that we can learn as professionals in the sector. What can we do to actually influence positive behaviour change? The first thing I want to do though is just do the acknowledgement of country and just say that the QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands, and we pay respects to elders past, present and future, and recognise that these lands have always been lands of teaching, research and learning. And so we're very privileged to be Garden Point's campus where I work right on the beautiful Brisbane River, and we love the fact that it's a very important place where we live and work and teach. So if you know what country you're from, please put it in the chat. Love to know if you know what Aboriginal country you're from. All right, well, let's get going. And first of all, I wanted to introduce Ross to you. And I can see Ross has just introduced himself on the chat. That's fantastic. And you are down in northern New South Wales, which is why I can see where you're coming from. And Ross has been working at QUT for a while. But Ross, I believe that you've had a long career in research, and I did have a little look at your LinkedIn and see some of the amazing work that you've been doing. You come from Scotland, I believe, and we're going to hear that very soon in your accent. But you did your PhD around social marketing. And so now a lot of your work is around social change activism. I love that. I love that. So how do we use social marketing for social good? And it's of great interest for me because I only became aware of social marketing when I did the unit, when I came to QUT, and I did the master's program at ACPNS. I've never heard of social marketing before, but back then, it's actually not a unit right now, but back then it was a unit, and I very much enjoyed learning about social marketing. But Rush, you've got a whole career out of this, and I'm very, very interested to hear from you what you've been learning and what you've been doing. And Ross, if you are interested in Ross's bio and some of the papers and books that he's been part of, you can go on to, I might in a moment put a little link to his QUT bio, but you'll see that he's authored many journal articles about different topics on social marketing, and also how we use social marketing for social good. So Ross, is it possible for you to just start off just by telling us what is social marketing and why do you love this field of research so much?
I'm not sure I'd say I'd love it, but certainly work in it. So my background's actually as a social scientist. So I did a politics and history degree back in Scotland at Strathclyde University. And how I got into social marketing, I was working one summer actually at the career service at Strathclyde Uni, and I'd been looking for sort of work opportunities, and a job came up in this Centre for Social Marketing, and basically they were doing research on how commercial marketing impacts social outcomes, and particularly they were looking at tobacco and alcohol marketing at that time, and really looking at that from a critical perspective and trying to, kind of create evidence around regulation and sort of policy intervention. So being from a kind of politics background and interested in, kind of social change, that's what kind of attracted me. And I ended up going to work there over a summer. And then after that, ended up going and working there full time on a project for my PhD, which was looking at the impact of alcohol marketing on youth drinking in Scotland. So that was kind of my PhD project. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I always thought marketing was, trying to get people to buy more Coca-Cola. Being in a kind of a Glasgow university and a politics department, you can imagine we were quite progressive. A lot of us were Marxists and socialists. So we always thought marketing was, bad. We thought it was the devil. And then I got to see that there was this other side to marketing, which was, I guess, on two dimensions. One is social marketing is about using marketing concepts and techniques along with some other approaches to bring about behaviour and social change. So, can we use marketing to promote environmental sustainability? Can we use marketing to help tackle mental health problems? Can we use marketing to support public health outcomes? For example, promoting COVID-safe behaviours, such as wearing a mask or washing your hands or isolating at home, or in the future taking a vaccine. So that was kind of the one side of it. But then the other side of it was this kind of critical side. It was actually critiquing the impact that commercial marketing has on social outcomes. And that was really where the work on alcohol marketing that I did kind of focused on. So my research and my work in social marketing has always kind of been spread across those two dimensions. Doing that kind of critique and also doing the kind of behaviour change stuff. So that was I kind of fell into it by accident. But I'd probably call myself a social change activist because I don't only use social marketing. I kind of work with and alongside a lot of other social change disciplines. So people working in sociology, psychology, even human geography, even engineering. And so what really interests me is bringing about social change and bringing about social good. And in the behaviour change area, there are lots of different frameworks and techniques and disciplines. There's behavioural economics, there's behavioural insights, there's the social marketing. So to me, I don't really care what you call it. It's about using good principles and practice for bringing about change. That's what I'm really interested in. Yeah. So that's a long-winded explanation, sorry.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. And as you were talking, I was thinking, wow, this week, I have seen so many adverts on TV and I'm hearing it on the radio about the betting ads. And of course, we're leading up to Melbourne Cup, which is a massive, time of the year where everybody, even if you don't normally gamble, a lot of people get involved in gambling, but they're putting these ads on all the time. My kids are seeing this. And I have to constantly remind them that that is marketing for, betting, and trying to remind my kids and myself, that we have to be very careful about the types of marketing that we listen to and think about what are the purposes of different types of marketing. So it's a very pertinent time of the year, Ross, to be thinking about this, I think. All right. Well, so now you know a little bit about social marketing and maybe what Ross has been doing. I wanted to just kick off with this post, which is a legit post that I saw on Facebook a few weeks ago when we were actually preparing for this session. And I thought, oh, wow, this is so pertinent, I think, to today's conversation. And I'm part of a community Facebook group. It's, you know, a lot of people do have local community groups. And this came through anonymously, but it said this: after lockdown, my mental health took a slide and I discovered online pokies. I'm a single mum. I'm lonely. This week I received my pay and lost the whole lot bar food shopping for the kids. I gambled my rent. 2 weeks in a row now because I needed to win it back. I feel sick. I can't look at my kids or myself in the mirror. I've never done anything like this before. I'm 40 and I can't believe it. This is a legit post I saw on Facebook, and I just wondered if you could put in the chat for me what this means to you. Like, what would you have felt? Or, you know, how does this make you feel to read this from a real person? And is it just one person, or do you think that you've seen this type of behavior? Now, this is obviously might be quite extreme, but have you in the community and in the organisations that you work with, have you seen behaviour change occurring because of the pandemic in any shape or form? I'd love you to just put in the chat whether this is something that's potentially we're all hearing about or we're all sort of experiencing even ourselves. Is this something that you're thinking about? Just pop it in the chat for me and we'll see if this resonates with you and your work at all. How is the pandemic affecting people that you work with? That could be even staff as well. I mean, we're not just talking about community, but it could be even in your own staff. Is their behaviour changing because of the pandemic in ways that they just can't believe? Like, this obviously is a lady who just can't believe that she's having this type of behaviour. And it's led to, you know, these, which she's obviously, from this post, she's obviously not happy about. Any thoughts on that? Or anybody want to talk? And I'll pick if I'll...
Actually, put in my 2 cents worth. So,
hi, Neil.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So I'm obviously based in Queensland, as I put in the chat, but I work with World Vision, and the majority of my colleagues are Melbourne or Victoria based. And so you can imagine the whole working from home and the isolation for us has been quite a challenge, and work with World Vision has respectfully took it on and put a lot of support through the employment and the workplace and culture. But it has probably been the number one challenge that all my colleagues are going through, without doubt.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, so even working from home or having to do work in a different way, and the stress and the pressure that, you know, comes from change, can really lead to different types of behaviour change. Yeah. Let's see. Georgia says half my team are now seeking support for depression due to COVID restrictions. Yeah, and having to juggle and caring for kids and work. Yeah, absolutely. So we're not only dealing with the behaviour change and these kind of issues that are happening in the community and with our clients, we're also dealing with it within our own organisations. And certainly at QUT, again, we're no different to any other organisation. Massive change going on because of the impact of the pandemic. And really that means that a lot of people are impacted in different ways, or they're coping in different ways. I suppose that's a thing, that we're individuals, so we kind of cope in different ways. And it sounds again like this Facebook post, that this is a single mum and maybe she doesn't feel there's a lot of support around her. So it really does depend on different things, which we're going to talk to Ross about, and we're going to get his insights. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's first of all, the conversation really just needs to be about the problem, but I want to reassure you that we are going to move on to some solutions and some ideas for positive intervention from Ross. So let's just start off with a conversation around the problems first. But don't worry, we are going to get on to some ideas for positive change and how you as leaders in the sector can really use the concepts that Ross understands and has been using to really positively influence people around you, whether that's in your family, your workplace, or your community. So, Ross, I suppose what I'd love to hear from you then is, how has COVID-19 affected behaviour? Positively and negatively, but really I think that we are very acutely aware of the negative influences of the pandemic. So can you give us an insight about what your research is showing and what you're sort of looking into in regards to this change because of the pandemic?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll talk about three areas in which I'm currently researching. So at the moment, I hold some research grants in the area of gambling. So one project is an Australian Research Council funded grant looking at sports betting, and this was actually a project that started before the pandemic. So we were kind of midstream running the project, and then COVID hit, and obviously that had quite a dramatic effect on the project and the participants, as well as kind of our focus. The second area I've been working in is around energy consumption, and particularly energy hardship for kind of more vulnerable householders in Australia. And that's been a project working funded by the Commonwealth. So again, that's been quite interesting to see how COVID has been shaping that. And then lastly, I'm going to reflect a little bit on some of the work I've been doing as part of the World Health Organization's technical advisory group on behavioural insights and sciences. And again, this was a special group set up by the WHO, or it was conceptualised some time ago to try and bring expertise and ideas on behaviour change into the WHO, which traditionally has been quite a top-down medical model, expert-driven kind of organisation. But again, with the event of the pandemic, that has really, shaken up the focus of that kind of initiative. So starting off with gambling, so in this project in sports betting, we were interested in how sports betting is becoming more normalised through, I guess, the marketing of it, but also its establishment as a regular social practice, particularly using mobile phones and sports betting apps. The sports betting apps have dramatically changed how people can gamble and how they bet. It means you can bet on virtually anything at any time and anywhere. And what that does now is it means that people, rather than having to go down to the TAB in a shop or go make a conscious decision to kind of go and bet, it's something that can become part of a night out or a conversation or a visit with friends. So we were interested in this project and looking at that, and we basically had 4 steps to the project. First of all was to get a narrative interview and a background of each participant. So we have 50 participants in the project, and it's really just to get their kind of gambling history and how they got into sports betting. But then the second stage of the project, we actually were doing an EEG study. So we actually get people to actually bet live on sport, and then actually measure their brainwave activity to see, what's going on and kind of their cognition and their kind of arousal. And that phase of the project was just about to start when the pandemic hit. So as you can imagine, that meant that we had to pause, we had to kind of refocus. And we have restarted that phase a couple of months ago, but operating under strict COVID safe protocols. So, we have to wear masks, we have to wear gowns, we have to use sanitizer everywhere, wash everything very thoroughly. But it has been quite an interesting process to go through to see how actually with the participants, COVID has changed things up for them. So there is data that's tracking data on consumer spending in Australia, which has shown that expenditure on online gambling has gone up significantly in Australia during the pandemic. So up about 75% increase in online gambling expenditure. Whereas, as you can expect, other expenditures like going out and eating in restaurants and, you know, various kind of expenditure on travel and so on has gone down significantly. So reflecting on that Facebook post that Ruth shared, I think there is a concern there that with people being stuck at home, being isolated, being depressed and struggling with mental health, being worried about money, especially those that have lost income or lost their jobs. You know, for some people, gambling is a release. Some people, it's a way to pass the time. For some people, it's a way to, you know, although there may be very long odds, they think it might be a way to win money or win back money. So it is a bit of a crutch, just like people have, you know, use alcohol or drugs or other things as a crutch sometimes in their lives. There is that concern. The other thing is that the gambling industry has been very smart in how it's dealt with the pandemic. Obviously, if you take sports betting, for a certain period of time, sport globally was paused and there was no sport on at all. And during that time, the gambling industry was quite smart in actually shifting and adapting. So in the sports betting apps, for example, they were promoting bets on things like the weather, or, you know, even betting on basketball in Tajikistan because its league was still going. You know, so they will find something for you to bet on, and then they will promote that in their advertising and on the apps. Now in Australia as well, obviously we were one of the first countries to get professional sport back up and running, and particularly with the NRL. So that window in which the gambling industry had to adapt and promote other things was fairly short before sport, you know, came back onto the scene. And then, you know, the evidence is that the gambling industry again adapted their advertising and their promotion around that. So there are a couple of studies that have actually mapped this here in Australia. The Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation funded one that actually mapped how gambling advertising tracked during the COVID crisis. And certainly they were very adaptable. You know, they've probably got business models for if there's a supply side shock, or if there's a kind of problem with betting markets, how do you actually keep customers, or how do you keep our customers going? So really when the pandemic was at its kind of peak in most of Australia, a lot of the focus was on, you know, these other kind of random bets you can have, or on online casino gambling, things like online roulette and other games like that. But as I said, as professional sport has come back, the gambling industry has kind of refocused on kind of promoting that. Now, when it comes to
can I stop you just for a second? Just to ask you a question about the psychology then of betting. So obviously you're saying that the betting industry has been very adaptable. So they're just looking for anything that people can bet on. And I saw Kylie's post, right now it's about the Queensland election, or so anything going on. They're finding things that people can bet on. So do you think that and maybe you're getting to this, so I apologise if I'm a bit early, in the fact that people are just doing more of what they already were doing, or are people finding ways to now bet because it's so easy and they can do it from their phone and they don't have to go out, and they, you know, it's so easy to do these days. Are they using betting now as a form of release, whereas in other times they wouldn't have? So yeah, is it more of the same, or is it new behaviours that are occurring in the betting field?
So really it's both. I mean, a lot of the focus in gambling as a social problem has been on problem and pathological gamblers, you know, those kind of hardcore people that, you know, will spend everything and, you know, spend all of their pay packet. And obviously that is a concern, although that group has largely stayed about the same size, especially pathological gamblers. It's a significant but reasonably small group. However, a lot of community organisations, including, you know, an organisation like the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, they have a bigger concern or a big concern about low and moderate risk gamblers. So these are the people that maybe don't bet to extreme, they don't bet every day, but they do have a bet, and that group is growing, and the burden of harm is much greater from that group because there are way more of them. So actually, even at lower levels of gambling, this can create, social harm and social impacts. Even if it's just, skipping a rent payment, or if it's, not being able to buy new clothes for the kids at school to go to school, or it could be, something, it could cause an argument between a couple at home and create relationship problems. It could be, the person stressed out from a big loss that one-off time, and then it affects their work and their productivity. So these kind of other social harms, mental health harms, with each person, it's quite small, with low and moderate risk gamblers, but taken as a whole across the society, it's actually quite a big impact. So there is a concern that group, these low and moderate risk gamblers, and what they're doing, because the burden of harm is much greater. And really what's happening in the gambling landscape is that the gambling industry, through its promotion, through its kind of lobbying of government and setting of the policy and regulatory environment, through the use of the apps and making it really available everywhere, they're kind of effectively normalizing betting. They're normalizing it. It's not this kind of, it's the weird old men that are kind of in the smoke-filled, kind of booking office that are doing it now. It's kind of anyone and anywhere. And we're finding that with our project participants. We've got a range of different people from different backgrounds, different cultures. We've got men, we've got women, different ages. So, there's not this kind of typical gambler now, like it can be all across sections of society. And of course, that's what the gambling industry wants. They want gambling to be seen as just something normal. It's a leisure pursuit. It's something regular, and it's every day. And, their kind of argument is that most people are able to do that at a low and moderate risk. But our argument is that, well, even at low and moderate levels, there is still harm created, and we need to be thinking about that. So
I'm sure the same goes for alcohol too. Because that again sounds very similar in the fact that people could have been very moderate drinkers or just gone out at a weekend when they went out to a restaurant to drink. But now it's so easy to, Uber Eats, and, it's so easy to order in alcohol even. And you're at home a lot more. So it's become very more common for the normal person who would have just been a moderate drinker to now be a more heavy drinker. And I want to absolutely disclose a personal story that we went through that very similar thing. We were very moderate drinkers, but we noticed over a few months that we were starting to drink a little bit more. And each night we were coming home and the kids were, trying to finish homeschooling, and we were starting to finish every day with a glass of wine or a gin and tonic. And we started to become very aware that our drinking was increasing. This is me and my husband. And we had to at some point say, hang on a minute, where is the line? Where do we now start to say, hang on a minute, we're now starting to make this a bit of a norm? And where do we start to say, hang on a minute, we've got to consciously decide that drinking is at this time in this situation? And so we actually right now we went on a no, stop all alcohol. We decided to go, we're not going to have any. And so we haven't had any for about 6-8 weeks now. But I think as you're talking, Ross, you're just reminding me that this isn't just about betting, and I can see the transferable things that are happening in the other types of addictive behaviour or coping behaviour in families and in workplaces. Yeah. Thanks, Ross.
Alcohol is an interesting analogy because alcohol is very much embedded into Aussie culture, and it is normalised, whereas gambling has kind of ebbed and flowed. So, Australia has always had a kind of association with gambling, but in terms of regulation, in terms of marketing, in terms of normalisation, it's been less so. But that's certainly something that the gambling industry is really pushing hard at and making a big attempt to make it become more everyday and sort of normalised, rather than just, say one day a year when you can play 2 up. We want these betting apps and betting to be here, there and everywhere. The interesting thing is as well is you need to track these things, obviously. So it tends to be that, you know, things like alcohol consumption, they can spike during something like a shock, like a pandemic. But generally when, for example, there's a recession, for the most part, alcohol consumption drops. Whereas what's been interesting is tracking how gambling expenditure has been going up. And it'll be very interesting to see whether that continues as post-COVID, you know, recessions are hitting a lot of countries. But the other thing is I guess even from a project and more focused perspective, we actually had to adapt what we've been doing on the project, because we had a participant whose partner raised an ethical concern with us about the project, saying that he'd lost his job, he'd kind of cracked up and kind of shouted at his boss and customers. You know, they were struggling at home, and his betting had increased quite dramatically during COVID. And we actually liaised with the ethics committee here at QUT and agreed that we would rescreen all our participants. So in our project, we were interested in working with low and moderate risk gamblers, and we screened them as such at the start of the project. But we had to recognise that COVID has changed so much for so many people that these people are not static in their gambling behaviours. You know, they may become different categories of gamblers during the project. So actually, before we recommenced and started the EEG component of the project, we rescreened everyone. So even in doing research, you know, you have to adapt around this pandemic and track where people are. And that's interesting in the gambling area, because gambling has always been very much about a snapshot of categorizing people. It's like, we'll give people a survey, we'll get them to answer questions about their gambling behavior, and then we'll categorize them as this type of gambler. But of course that fluctuates over time in life course and events. And COVID is part of that. COVID has spiked people's gambling or changed people's gambling. For some, it might have meant they can't gamble because they don't have any money. So, you know, these things are very dynamic and very fluid. And I think we do need to focus a lot on a lot of different behaviours that have social impacts, and tracking how they've gone through COVID, but post-COVID. I certainly think with the impact that COVID has had on people's mental health, we probably haven't yet seen the full brunt of that. I think for some people, there's a delayed reaction. Yes, it's a struggle getting through lockdown and isolation and all of that, but people are going to struggle, I think, to reconnect and re-engage in the world, you know, and get over it. You know, that kind of, it'll be almost like a post-traumatic kind of effect. And I think there needs to be a lot more focus on that. That's certainly going to be one of our biggest social change challenges in Australia, is how do we support people's mental health in the long term coming out of the pandemic. I haven't seen as much. I think understandably the focus is more at the moment being on, okay, how do we kind of put out the fires and fix people's immediate mental health issues.
So before we do move on to some suggested solutions or ideas for what we could be doing now as leaders and as professionals in the sector, let me just pause and just make sure there's no other questions for Ross at this point about the problem and what we're dealing with. Has anybody else got any sort of comments or questions for Ross at this point? Elizabeth says she believes that she's seen a huge percentage of JobKeeper has been spent on gambling.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That is something that there's a strange dynamic for some people. Some people who are on New Start with the job seeker payments, they're actually got a little bit more money. And that means that, you know, then they may spend that on different things. I did mention at the start, I've been working in the area of energy research and energy hardship as well. And funnily enough, there were major concerns, especially for people on New Start, that, you know, COVID was going to be really terrible for them, because you imagine people are stuck at home. They're using their energy all the time because they can't go anywhere. But actually the job seeker payments have meant that the amount of people going to social support services among that cohort has reduced, because they actually have a little bit more money and they're able to pay their energy bills. But certainly among kind of those just getting by, not on job seeker or job keeper, but, you know, kind of low wages, they're really struggling with their energy bills at the moment because, they're using them a lot and they're at home a lot. So that's actually something that the government are really looking into to try and provide greater supports in recognition that the energy market in Australia is not really working effectively. We have the highest prices for energy in the OECD, and we have a lot of people in energy hardship in Australia.
Great. Well, let's move on then to, potential solutions or some ideas for how we as leaders can be addressing these issues. And I've put a few questions together for you, Ross, that we might have a chat about. So in terms of what are some of the ways that we can support people in their behaviours, or at least in making them aware of their behaviours, because sometimes we have to have self-awareness first before we want to change our behaviours. And then what do you feel are some of the behaviour changes that are going to be key to eliminating COVID even? I just think it would be great to get your insights into and some tips for us working in the sector. What can we be doing right now?
Yeah, I think one thing is, good leadership is essential. And it's thrown about as a kind of, a term quite a lot that we need good leadership. But that doesn't make it, any less of a truth. And I don't think we often get it actually in a lot of organisations. What I've seen during the COVID crisis is organisations scrambling around, a lot focusing on cutting costs or cutting things off and reducing support, reducing resources, and really just ticking boxes in support, saying, we've got these kind of, support services available, go and contact them yourself if you need it. And to me, that's not good leadership. That's not really rallying around the troops, bringing people together and supporting them and focusing, on how do we move forward. I think in terms of, kind of solving some of these problems, we need holistic approaches. And that's something I'd like to kind of reiterate around what social marketing is. A lot of people think about marketing and they think it's just advertising. But actually, if I'm a commercial company, my marketing involves policy advocacy, it involves lobbying, it involves stakeholder marketing, it involves service delivery and design. It involves products, obviously, it involves promotion. There's a lot of different tools in the marketing toolkit that organisations use. And really to tackle some of these behavioural problems, mental health, energy, gambling, even COVID safe behaviours, even uptake of a COVID vaccine once it's available, we're really going to need a combination of different tools, and we're going to need to work across different population segments. So certainly the marketing tool of segmentation, targeting, positioning will be key. Not treating everyone the same, understanding people have different needs, different issues, different supports that they may require, and so on. The one thing that's coming up a lot as well, certainly with the WHO Technical Advisory Group, is that we need community champions and community leaders to play their part. So for example, with COVID vaccines, those in the community that have questions and concerns and, are a bit reticent to take a vaccine, we need to rely on community champions, maybe faith-based leaders, community leaders, those running community centres or involved in community organisations, particularly among more vulnerable groups, to actually kind of, assuage those fears and kind of bring people along with taking the vaccine. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about anti-vaxxers and the kind of the noise that they're making, especially in social media. That is a concern as well, but they are actually in number a relatively small group. But the threat that they have is that they may influence those who are kind of on the borderline, who are on the fence. So really for organisations like WHO, the big focus is on how do we get those people who are a bit unsure and how do we bring them, through to taking the vaccine. And then of course you've probably got a relatively sizable number of people who are keen to take the vaccine or are willing to take the vaccine.
Ross, I believe I would understand then that that social media is a massive factor in this, because before it would have been, you know, newspaper advertising, or it would have been TV advertising, but now you've got this like social media happening, and you've got people who are doing social marketing, whether they know it or not, because they're just, you know, talking about their opinions, whether it's educated or not, you know, they're just because they've heard something or their friend has told them something. We're influenced by so many things today, aren't we? So how does the non-profit sector in particular, how does it have a bigger voice, especially on social media, to really promote? And I was thinking normalizing counselling, for instance, you know, normalizing that it's okay to ask for help, and normalizing that it's okay to get counselling, or, you know, it's okay to, you know, talk about what's going on for you. So what's the powerful role that social media has in all of this?
Look, social media is tricky. I mean, we've been talking about that among this WHO group, because there's so much noise and so much, you know, kind of distraction on social media. For organisations like WHO, especially for non-profit and community organisations, you know, you're not going to be able to dominate the social media landscape, because to do that you need huge purchasing power, you know, to actually cut through. And even then, you know, you're no guarantees of being able to cut through. And there are things that you can do with social media. You know, it is quite good for segmenting and targeting very specific groups, and that is fairly low cost. So if you've got a cohort of people in the community that you're trying to support or work with around certain issues, you know, perhaps use it for that. But in terms of like dominating the narrative, it can be very difficult, and it can actually drag down your organisation, get involved in these kind of debates and discourses that, you know, these trolls or these kind of people that have got very entrenched views are just going to keep coming at you. And you see that, you know, half the time now I go on Twitter, I think I'm coming off, this is just a lot of nonsense, you know. But I do see people that I know are in my network get embroiled in these kind of disputes. So I would say, look, don't expect to be able to dominate the narrative. You know, yes, you can use it to put out information, but perhaps don't risk getting embroiled into debates and discourse that you're going to lose or going to burn up all your time and resources. And then perhaps use it for things like, you know, doing segmentation and targeting and reaching the, you know, the really at need groups that you've got out there. But remember as well that social media is not the only tool in the toolbox. And I've worked with many organisations who approach me and say, we've decided to run a social media campaign on behaviour change. And then when I ask them, I say, well, what's your strategy and you know, what's your target group and why are you using social media? They say, oh, well, everyone's using it and we need to use it. So they don't actually have a rationale for using it. They think, well, that's what everyone uses. That's the big thing to use now. So let's us do that. But I actually am just as supportive of just doing some old-fashioned community development and outreach, or, you know, or focusing on service delivery, you know. You can often get as much bang for buck doing that than doing the social media stuff. So what I would say is that, remember, social media is not always the answer, and it's not the only tool in the toolbox. And I think we get a lot of kind of promotion of social media as the answer to all our problems, and sometimes it's not. So, you know, I think sometimes you need to pause and say, well, look, actually, do we need to use social media, and why would we want to use that over some other approaches?
So just in the last couple of minutes then, really about what does success look like, and if we're trying to create some behaviour change. And again, I'm thinking that many online will be thinking about their own staff and their own workforce. How do we measure some success in regards to behaviour change and attitudes? What would be something that people online today could take away and think about in regard to their own staff well-being and their workforce, you know, and how this is all affecting them just as much as the community? We're all part of the community. What are some tips from you about, you know, measuring how well we're doing in this regard? And if we're not doing as well as we need to, where would we start?
Yeah, look, this is tricky. I mean, I think with measuring success, you know, we do have a lot of focus on measurement and KPIs and growth and productivity in the modern world. And there has been some conversation during COVID, you know, can we build back better? And And I think, we need to start looking at different things, rather than productivity and growth being the focus all the time. I'd like to see us focus on things like well-being, and social well-being and personal well-being, and, good mental health, or, good sense of connectivity, good sense of capabilities. These are the sort of measures that people in the social change arena are starting to look at. And we're actually seeing some countries do that. I know that, for example, New Zealand, countries like Scotland, they've been looking at well-being indicators as their key indicators now, rather than things like GDP. Because, we've got to think about issues like climate change. We've got to think about issues like well-being. Is it realistic to always have growth and to always focus on growth? And, that's very relevant even in the university sector, where we're very much focused on productivity and growth. And all of our measurement indices and kind of focus is around that. So for me, success would be about things like well-being and happiness and, kind of connectivity and social connectedness, things like capabilities. Those are the indicators that tell you whether people are happy, are functioning, are doing well. And from that, I believe success does flow. It's no secret, is it, in any organisation? If you focus on making your staff happy and keeping them happy and supported, you do well. But most organisations don't do that. They do not. We're focused on this kind of managerialism and commercial neoliberal kind of focused approaches. And that's something that, social marketers talk about, and it's something that I know the non-profit sector has witnessed. Ideas from the commercial world have come in, and it's very much competition, marketisation, growth, productivity, efficiency. And there is a downside to those kind of, ways of focusing on things. So I'd very much like to see post-COVID, a bit of a shift away from that mindset. And then, kind of obviously evaluating that or measuring these things, measuring these indices among your staff, or, having good kind of reflexive conversations with your staff, good honest conversations, especially from leadership. There's that quite old concept of floor walking, you kind of where you have leaders and managers going around the organisation and speaking to everyone, even down to the coalface. And again, I think in a lot of organisations, we've gotten away from that. You've got kind of CEOs and leaders who kind of act as kind of rock stars. They're kind of on this level and no one sees them and no one really can get at them and speak to them. And I think we need to move away from that. So certainly some reflections there on kind of organisational culture and organisational kind of dynamic is something that I would hope would change and lead us more to success as well.
Brilliant. My work is all centred around organisational culture. And, up until now, again, it's really still been something that we kind of know is important, but we really don't have any really good strategy about in organisations. But I think that COVID is an opportunity for organisations to say our culture is more important than ever, and we can't just leave it to chance. We have to make sure that we have the culture that supports our team to be productive. We're not asking people not to be productive, but we want them to be feeling safe, psychologically safe, as well as physically and mentally safe. And so I think that the conversations around culture and culture change is such an opportune time right now. And we can use some of these concepts of social marketing in our strategy to think about, well, how do we promote good, positive attitudes and behaviours within our organisation? Because that will have a good flow-on effect.
I think the other thing I'd like to say is that people need some hope. It's been a terrible year and people are pretty beaten down by it, and we've had a lot of bad news. And in a lot of organisations where we work, we've had a lot of bad news, cuts being made, job losses. And, you just can't keep hitting people over the head and expecting good outcomes. At some point, there has to be some forward thinking and some hope and some, actually, we can do good stuff here, and actually there's some things to look forward to. And, it's not all doom and gloom and not all bad news. And, we are part of that, but again, leadership is important there. That's something I've observed. There's not been a lot of hope around in the air so far. in the organisations that I've kind of engaged with. And at some point we need to get over that. Yes, COVID has had a dramatic impact, and it's impacted on business and kind of profits and income and all these other things. But we need to start thinking about, well, what does a future look like that's got some hope in it, and how do we actually promote that among our organisations and among our staff?
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, if you've got any sort of examples of what you're doing in your organisation, please feel free to put it in the chat, because we're really nearly out of time. And I want to really thank Ross for your time today, Ross, and for sharing some of these issues and the research that you've been doing. We, I believe, as leaders in the sector, really need to have these conversations, because our workforce, our families, our communities are so incredibly important right now, and we need to turn our attention to not just the problem but the solutions, and looking for some strategies that will help us thrive post-COVID, because we're going to get through this and we're going to come out the other side, and we need to be really strong in the way that we deal with that post-COVID kind of trauma, as you say. So thank you to Ross, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. And if there are any other tips, I will be putting this on a blog with the recording. So if you have anything that you would like other people to know about, some links or some other great things for people to read or to look at, please do so. I just wanted to let you know that we have done 2 recordings, 2 other webinars in the last month that we've been meeting. One of them is about the stats around How Giving Are We Australia. We had a free webinar mini-series, and that's all online. People can share about what's going on in the fundraising and donation space. And we also did a careers information night last week, which we recorded, and we're going to put the recording online about that. And that was really looking at careers in the sector at the moment and how has COVID impacted on the sector. So please make sure that you go to our website at ACPNS and see the things that we have been doing. And we've got 2 things coming up that I thought you might be interested in. One of them is a presentation by Craig Furneaux about social enterprise. That's coming up on the 6th of November, completely free for you to just come in and listen to Craig's perspectives on social enterprise. And also we've got a fundraising summit coming up on the 10th of November. We're partnering with FIA, and we've got some incredible speakers from the fundraising space. So if your organisation has anything to do with fundraising, I really encourage you to come along and listen into some of the tips and strategies that the fundraising experts will be giving us. So we are wrapping up for another session, and it has been wonderful to have you here today, having your tea with us all. Another great conversation. Please continue this back at your organisations and send some more ideas through to me, because next month in November is going to be our very last Tea and Buns for the year. And I want to have a great topic that's going to really round us up for the year and really give us some of that hope that we're looking for. So if you have any ideas of either speakers or topics, or you'd like to know something, please give me an email, and I would be very, very happy to hear from you. But if there's anything that's been triggered for you today, please be reassured that we are here for you. If anything you're struggling with as an individual or as an organisation, just reach out. We may know someone that you can talk to. We may be able to share some research, or if there's anything that you just need personally, as I said, or organisationally, please don't feel afraid to just give us an email, give us a call. We're here for you. We're part of your sector. We're part of this sector. We're all in this together, and we're all human at the end of the day, and we really care about you and what you're doing. So please feel free to stay connected.